Hey guys, first Regardsman here, and I'll be talking about the brand new boss in Space Marine 2 Patch 14 and the new heroics that are coming out in the upcoming content on the public test server, and just the general player response. Now, to talk about this with me, I have brought on Jefficus once again. Now, Jeff, you have played against the new Chaos Terminator Sorcerer boss quite a bit in the battle simulation, and I have to say, this boss is pretty brutal, and a lot of players are having some pretty negative reactions to it, so I'm curious what you think about that.
This kind of reminds me of the Vortex Beast, and kind of when they ported the Vortex Beast over to Siege mode. It's the kind of boss where you need a lot of skill in order to beat it. You need to be paying attention to the boss. And in Siege mode, you at least have a lot of things helping you out. Like, you could spawn the Dreadnought in for Wave 15 of Siege mode, and then whenever you're fighting the Vortex Beast in the Vortex mission, it's kind of alright because you're just dealing with the boss. But imagine the boss with like an extremist wave and then spawning another extremist wave whenever you get the boss to half HP. That's kind of how this new Terminus enemy feels. And I already know that whenever we have that weekly stratagem where it's double Terminus bosses with more HP and more damage, dude, that is going to be nearly impossible, especially when we talk about the context of some of the nerfs to the game that we're seeing with this next update.
I definitely agree that the new boss with like all the cloning, those just random damage effects, I think this one is kind of outside of the general player base's skill level at the moment. I think Saber is trying to make like, like, oh, this is the new boss, and like we're gonna keep ramping up the difficulty in these guys because you guys must be better at the game by now. But I think when it comes to Space Marine 2's player base, the vast majority of the community is just too casual for something like that. And we already saw the negative reactions to having stuff like forced absolute difficulty on cape grinds and just general reactions to hard stratagems. I think a boss like this on top of the hard strats like you were mentioning, I think that that is a pretty brutal thing for the majority of the player base. I think they're gonna have a pretty negative reaction to that. And if when you actually fight this boss, there are like 3 clones that will spawn of itself that'll have like Majora's level HP. I think those will be toned down, but as far as like the overall just mechanics of the boss, I think he is the most difficult boss in the entire game, far harder than the Vortex Beast, and he requires some significant timing and positioning, and that's just the hardest thing for most players to deal with. So I think going forward, they're gonna have a lot of trouble with that.
Well, it's not really the kind of boss you could run away from either, because he like teleports onto you and kind of like prevents that. And so a lot of people are going to try to burst him down, which I think is going to be the way that you tackle the fight. Is you just need to take him out as fast as possible, which seems to be more feasible than with the Hell Brute. But with something like the Auspex nerf, where it's no longer going to apply to burns, for example, like we're already going to see kind of a little bit of shakeup with the weapon meta. So we'll see how the community deals with it. I know for a fact that once like the console players get their hands on this, dude, there's going to be an uproar. 100%. 100%. Like a
Yeah, I
lot of
think the
people are
consequences have
not
a
going to
huge
like this.
It's going to be a hard boss. It's
Dude,
much harder than the Vortex Beast. And over almost a year later, the Vortex Beast is still like the most hated boss in Space Marine 2. And I think this one's
yeah.
about to take that crown. And really, Chaos as a faction is one that players just predominantly avoid in this game, or just like have a general disinterest in playing versus Tyranids. And I think this is not going to help that at all. I understand like we're filling out the roster here. We're like having a Chaos Terminator Sorcerer. That's a good addition to the game. Like it looks really cool. The animations are awesome. The voice lines are cool. I think the boss is very well made. I just think it's a very toxic boss. I remember reading the data mines for this one that like he would have clones of himself, giant laser beams, and I was like, this thing is going to be a toxic like AoE spawning just nightmare for players. And here we are, and developers have trouble with that. Now, you also mentioned the meta shifting in weapons. I do agree, but I want to say I don't think it's shifting from these new heroics, because this public test server has been like the buggiest we have ever had. I've never seen so
Oh
many
no.
broken perks. Like the Stalker Bolt Rifle at the moment, you can't even apply the Auspex scan on headshots for 5 consecutive shots. It has to be on like the body shots, which is totally counterintuitive. So it's kind of hard to tell where some of these weapons are going to land in the future. A lot of players are having very negative reactions to the Power Sword, and also just things like the Combi Flamer even for not having enough ammunition. So I think we're going to see some significant buffs going to the official patch. But like you said with the Auspex scan, burn nerf, That's a huge nerf to the game. Like that is like de facto made like the heroic heavy bolt rifle or the bolt rifle grenade launcher like the best weapons on the tactical currently, which they were like,
Yes.
arguably already, but the pyroblast was still sitting there as like, a pretty god tier pick in the hard strats and operations. But now I think it's just blatantly going to be these grenade launchers for that class, which kind of limits his like top tier options at some things. We know games will always have a meta, but as far as the new heroics are concerned, I think these need a serious look at. Have you played around with any of these or like seen the community reaction recently?
Well, dude, I think so I think what's happening is Saber is very afraid of releasing really powerful options and then having to revisit those options later and then nerf them because they don't want to make any players mad. But if they release these options really weak and then they buff these weapons later, then they look like they're heroes. They look like they're listening to the community, which I mean, hey, cool, like it's awesome that you're listening to feedback and everything, but we'd rather you listen to the feedback before this gets out of PTS and hits the live game because things like the new power sword not having access to burn is such a significant oversight, or just the weird jankiness of the new power fist. Like, I don't understand how that would have gotten through testing at all. It's
Yeah, it's
extremely jank to
ridiculous.
use.
It's
It's
ridiculous.
ridiculous.
Yeah, there's no tracking
Yeah,
at all. It's like impossible to actually hit off at like on anything pretty much. And even
yeah.
if you do, it's not really worth doing. So I think some of these weapons need a massive buff. Like you said, the power sword, the burning power sword. I remember I was like joking around by chat for a while, being like, they're like, oh, what's the new burning power sword effect going to be? And I was like, well, it's obviously going to be burning, guys. The weapon's like literally on fire, so of
It's
course.
on
But
fire.
but
Yeah.
we go on the perk tree, and instead we get the Nocturne's Retort perk instead, which gives you like extra light damage on your speed style attacks and also reduces your parry window. I don't know how we got to like the Salamander's Power Sword when we previously had the Argent Edge in like patch 12 and the Heroic Heavy Bolt Rifle and stuff like that. Also the White Scar's Chainsword in patch 13. And like now it feels like this is the worst heroic batch. Obviously we're only on the public test server, so buffing them up will probably happen here. But like you said, it does feel like Saber is afraid to release weapons in a very powerful state, even though I think that's what the game needs in a lot of cases, because the power creep in Space Marine 2, we're already there. Like, TAC, Bulwark,
Oh yeah.
Assault, Tech Marine, these classes, or even like Sniper at times, these classes all have ridiculously busted builds that will just like completely trivialize content anyways. But adding in more options to like have fun in the game that are relatively powerful, I don't think it's a bad thing for the game. I think it would take a lot, and I mean like a lot, to actually bring up some of these other weapons like the levels of the Argent Edge or just the Bulwark class in general, or the tactical's damage on like a 300% damage bonus with the Auspex scan, and they're really afraid to do that. And like you said, is probably because they don't want to like have to nerf something, because players really since Helldivers 2 have had a very negative connotation on nerfs of any kind.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to kind of see what their playtesting process looks like internally, like if they have like QC, like a QC process, it's like quality control. But because when you create an enemy like the new Terminator Sorcerer, you add it to the game, and like, do you add it into the game within the context of like, hey, like there's a chance that this is going to be like a double terminus buffed HP, buffed damage boss for our hard weekly, or are they balancing the game around like, let's say, uh, whatever the most minimal or substantial difficulty is? They're like, okay, so we're just gonna create this enemy for this. Oh, it does a lot of really cool things, tone down the damage, and then oh yeah, we still got to balance it for absolute difficulty. Okay, so like let's up the damage, make sure that these lasers do this, that, and the other. They do this much damage to armor, blah 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 blah. Like, I'm curious to see how they're balancing the game because it might help us understand where they're coming from with these weapons. But it's like you said, dude, like, how do we go from the White Scar's Chainsword to the very beta Salamander's Power Sword, which basically is just Argent Edge 2.0? I don't
Yeah.
know.
I would say I actually am curious to see how they deal with their balance decisions internally. I think that they balance the game. It's pretty like my tinfoil hat. I think they balance the game around absolute difficulty, and they go backwards and go like, okay, we're gonna change this for like lower difficulties, and then we'll just throw hard strats on it. And then for like siege mode, I feel like they don't even pay attention to like certain ways of siege mode at all, and don't even care.
No, there's no way. There's no way.
Like
Yeah.
they edit the scaling a little bit and go like that should be good enough, because there's no way they have like at least the devs who are making those decisions are going in there there and being like, oh, an 86% damage reduction on this boss of like weigh 50 billion. I'm sure that will actually like, be a huge decision for them. Not really at all though. I just think they're kind of doing whatever as far as siege mode balance is concerned, beyond things like the tech priest. As far as absolute difficulty is concerned, that is where 99% of these weapons feel like they are balanced around, and then you have some outliers there that overperform on hard strats and hard siege. And I think that's like how the game has been predominantly balanced so far. However, when it comes to the new heroics they've been making, it does feel like there is an internal balance design that is kind of against what the players want in some cases. And I'll just
Yeah.
want to say this like straight up, that I think balance in games is important, and I think balance should be there because you should not have a build so powerful that you can just walk through the game. Because if I have one guy that has the god tier build that is like, okay, I play the game for you, I'm losing my experience as a player in a group match. Like if I'm playing with 3 players and one player is doing everything, I don't have to do anything. I don't even get to play my build anymore. And that's where balance becomes a problem. So that's why they nerf things like the grenade launcher. That's why they nerf things like the pyroblaster, because these things are such outliers and they are taking away from the gameplay experience for players who actually know how to use them, because they are just that strong. So I think those are fair balancing decisions in this game. When it comes to like the new weapons they're adding in, I think they really need to look at these and be like, it's okay to have a weapon like one shot a guy. Like, why does a new Melta take like 5 days to charge up? But the old heroic plasma we got in patch 13, this thing came out of the box like damn near one-shotting Extremis, and they're afraid to make these other weapons powerful. So it is a very odd choice. And some of the decisions they make on these public test servers, they just kind of make me feel like Saber doesn't play their own game. Because when you look at some of these weapons, you could just ask any player's experience in Space Marine 2 and be like, is this good? And they'll tell you, oh, obviously not. And like they would just scrap it immediately. So the fact that these went past like the original drawing board is kind of odd to me.
Well, the numbers never match up, right? Like, for example, for the Tactical's new Melta heroic variant weapon, it feels a lot like the plasma gun from Dark Time. That kind of seems like the niche that it's supposed to fill. But it functionally works very similar to like the heavies, like heavy plasma incinerator heroic weapon, where it's like that single shot kind of like really powerful ammunition kind of power fantasy. But the heavies is probably significantly better because it's faster and it's way more ammo efficient than this new Melta variant. But dude, like the numbers, they really just don't add up, because when we talk about something like Space Marine Year 3 and the potential CHP rework slash nerf, like a lot of these ranged weapons, when you're taking them to fight a new terminus enemy like the Sorcerer, for example, like if these weapons are not going to be giving us the same CHP recovery that we currently have, and we're supposed to be getting like melee CHP back in this new proposed system, I would imagine that you would probably have like 5 seconds to get your CHP back, because
Yeah.
you're not getting close to that dude. It's not happening. He's going to teleport around you. Your combo is going to get interrupted. Like your CHP is not recovering. And so I'm kind of curious what they're balancing the game around, what version of the game they're balancing the game around, because it doesn't seem like it's patch 14. It seems like it might be like patch 17 or something is what they're playing with, not necessarily the current version of the game.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see a massive CHP recovery in like patch 15. They talked about they want to do this in like patch 13, but the next anniversary patch is very unlikely to have a test server at all. And the patch after that might have like those balance changes we were talking about before they were talking about. And I think that's where we're going to see most of those changes actually occur in like an actual PTS, because I imagine that like patch 16 will have a public test server, and people will play it and be like, what the hell is going on here? What are these things? Why is this so bad? And they'll have like a massive backtrack on the CHP recovery. But CHP recovery in Space Marine 2 has been like a huge issue forever. Like advanced conditioning has been like an almost required perk for some players because they just cannot manage the CHP recovery, because it's only like 1 second of delay, which is kind of absurdly tight windowed compared to a lot of games. So I think that they should definitely rework it. But the way the game is played right now with the range weapons, I think those are kind of like fundamental to the game design of Space Marine 2 at this point. I know they said like way back when that ranged damage giving you back your contested health was an unintentional feature, and it was supposed to prioritize melee, but I mean, thank God it didn't, because the melee CHP recovery, or just the melee system with that delay, was just horrific anyways, and it still kind of
Yeah,
is
there's
on
no
like
way.
90% of classes, and like half the enemies on one of the factions for like Thousand Suns, those just teleport away from you in the middle of your combo and give you 0 damage and 0 CHP recovery anyways, so ranged weapons are pretty much mandatory for those regardless. And I think like as we go forward into the game, I think Saber should definitely just be like, okay, that's just like if you want to put in crazy enemies, like a Chaos Terminator Sorcerer, like we talked about at the beginning of the video, also let the players get incredibly powerful on top of that. Because if you're really trying to push this up for the player base, and the player base's skill levels where it predominantly is at, I think a little bit of power creep for some of the weaker options in the game is kind of okay. We've already seen Space Marine 2 get like significantly power creeped in the past, and they want to make it harder again, they can always do that with like new stratagems. So like that's something they can obviously address.
Mhm. I think that additionally, they need to take a look at chaos because the enemies are getting faster and faster and harder to fight. Ever since they added the Zangor Enlightened and then the Chaos Spawn, like they're going to get to a point where you're going to have a lot of lore nerds coming out of the woodworks going, "Well, hold on here, I'm a Primaris Space Marine. Like I should be able to move faster than this Chaos Spawn." Like it's going to get to that point. We're going to get to a point where the immersion of feeling like a Primaris Space Marine is going to come into question. And obviously this is a video game and there has to be certain like levels of like I guess representation that we need to be willing to break. Like obviously we're not going to be able to just solo a freaking Carnifex on the tabletop. That's probably not going to happen. At least for most of the classes that we have represented in Space Marine 2. But at the same time, they need to get the feel just right. And if every single enemy on the screen is starting to move faster than the player character, fight faster than the player character, and be on a completely different level, then it's there are going to be a lot of players who just choose to fight Tyranids. Like they just choose Tyranid missions. They don't choose any Chaos missions, which is not how you want the game to be balanced at all. You don't want to like isolate your player base.
I think it's already kind of there in a lot of cases where, like, I played the game since launch, and during that entire time period, I have never seen the player base for like more than a week say like, oh, we all love Chaos more Tyranids. It's always been Tyranids first. I think Tyranids had a fundamentally better design. I think that's just where players like to fight, and that's where they like to use their builds for the most part. Chaos can also be pretty fun, but like, I mean, arguably Chaos Spawn made as like the what would you call it? The most complained about enemy in the entire game, which will soon also be the Chaos Terminator Sorcerer. But Chaos Spawn,
Oh
I
yeah.
don't think they're that bad, but if the player's response is like just like this sucks, we hate these guys, I want to play Tyranids, I just don't imagine like bosses like this would go over very well. But that's all I have to say in this one, guys. Let us know in the comments below what you think about the new Chaos Terminator Sorcerer boss and the new heroic weapons. And also go and subscribe to Jefficus, who is a Warhammer YouTuber. And also, if you like content like this, subscribe to me. And as always, take it easy. Thanks for watching. Bye.
The Emperor protects.